two bad jobs in a row. One, Gibson, where I rejoined Keith McMillan, who was at that point running the Gibson Western Innovation Zone.
Mm-hmm.
And, some good work came out of there, but Gibson is well, anyone in the industry knows Gibson is a weird-ass company to work for.
Yeah.
And, we were working on stuff which couldn't be made out of wood, so it was particularly hopeless there. If you can make it out of wood, Gibson has a half a chance of understanding it, but their forays into tech have been ill-starred.
Right. Yeah. Now, I'm trying to wrap my head around the timing of this. Where did Zeta fit in on this?
Zeta was pretty early for me. It was
okay.
probably maybe mid 80s.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, probably mid 80s.
And then you went to work at Gibson when?
Late. I left EFI after a decade or so at a real company and a real startup that went public. So there was a little bit of upside to that.
Sure.
I then went back to Gibson, working with Keith, who I'd enjoyed working with at Zeta.
At Zeta, right.
And I decided I was not going to be a manager anymore. I was going to be an individual contributor, which sounded way more fun.
Yeah.
So I go to Gibson and I last, a couple of months, maybe 3 months before Henry Juskowitz of Gibson and Keith have a huge falling out. And Keith gets summarily summoned to Nashville and fired while he's in Nashville. And so suddenly, gee whiz, the Gibson Western Innovation Zone has no head anymore. So I didn't want this. I tried to not do this, but they ended up making me in charge of it for a little while.
Oh, no.
So go the dreams of being an independent contributor again. And it was like a political nightmare. I met some really great people there who I'm still friends with, but boy, Gibson is one of the most dysfunctional companies ever.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've known a lot of people that have had some interaction with them. And that's exactly the feedback you get, which is, I met some amazing people. Oh my God, are they screwed up?
They basically have a club. You say, I'm in the silver club, I'm in the gold club, I'm in the platinum club. And that's indicating how many times you've been fired and rehired at Gibson. Honest to God, I'm not kidding. This is truly the case. It was sort of a nightmare. But, some good work came out of it. The Echoplex Digital Pro came out of that, starting with the seed from Matthias Grob. But, a lot of great work started there. The Zippy thing, which ended up being the seeds of OSC, started between there and Sinmat. So, there were smart people there. We had fantastic lunches. What can I say? We'd go out to lunch with a bunch of smart guys, and that's the only thing I miss out of working is lunching with smart guys.
Right.
But it totally fell apart. At one point, the doors were padlocked and all the hard drives were removed from the machines, and half the people there were sued, and it got really ugly at Gibson. And so from there, I don't know if this is which one is the frying pan and which one is the fire. From there, I went to Headspace/Beatnik, run by Thomas Dolby, and I made it about 8 years there, which amazes me today. That's one of the weirder jobs ever.
In what way?
Well, it was run by a pop star. And, Thomas is a really smart guy. I don't mean to detract from him being smart, but he is not even sort of a businessman. And he was trying to sell products that he had a name for and a loose concept for, but nothing else. And he was, talking to tech companies about, acquiring this great thing I have. And one thing that's great out of the whole Headspace Beatnik thing is that we came out with this soft synth that was a very lightweight soft synth, which found its way into a lot of cell phones. A bunch of manufacturers, actually. And so I got to spend some time in Finland and Japan and Sweden and Germany and talking to all these manufacturers who were licensing the Headspace engine. But this was like right around the time of the .com boom, and venture capital people were throwing money at us to build giant scalable systems about something. Didn't matter what, really, but they wanted to see us build something big, and here's some money. And
so, how much of that do you think was driven by? I mean, one of the things Dolby was in addition to being a great songwriter and great performer, he was also a great promoter. right? That's one of the things I would say is whether it was like, whether he was talking about digital audio in the general case or talking about something specific that he was doing with that team, he knew how to excite people with words, right?
That's absolutely correct. And he could get a meeting just about anywhere.
Oh, sure, of course.
Mostly because these, tech people had been making out with their girlfriend in
Blinded
college.
me with science.
Right, yeah. One of my favorite Thomas quips is we were at Adobe meeting with someone, and someone in the parking lot said, "Wow, Thomas Dolby, great. You only had one hit, didn't you?" And he looks at him without blinking an eye and says, "It's one more than you had, isn't it?" And, he has a rabid fan base. But if you're in the tech biz, it's better if you have someone who has a good grasp of tech. He had a grasp of what he wanted to use tech for, but not how tech was created. Yeah. And we were essentially trying to create tech for third parties.
Right.
And then they got into this whole needle drop licensing model, which, never really panned out, but they sunk millions of dollars in. So, yeah, Headspace was interesting. Thomas recently wrote a book where he threw me under the bus. So I'm apparently the reason he didn't found YouTube.
You bastard.
I know. And after it came out, a lot of the Headspace people said, "I can't believe he did that." And, "Are you going to write a rebuttal?" And I realized, well, no, I'm not going to write a rebuttal. There is zero upside for me trying to write a rebuttal to this book. And, the funny thing is that we talked a few times while he was writing this book, and he sent me an early copy to get my feedback on it. And I can't imagine what he thought my feedback was going to be. Right. There are other people in there whose name he changed in the book.
Oh, really?
But water under the bridge now.
Yeah, I guess so. Then after that, what was your arc?
Pretty shortly after that, I did the Eardrill thing. I had been playing the Buchla. I'd been trying to proselytize the Buchla on various websites like, Muff Wiggler and a handful of others, because there were very few examples at that point. Right. And, the examples that you tend to fall into with the Buchla are not deemed, quote, musical, unquote, from a lot of people's point of view. So I tried to, the people who are going to buy the Buchla are going to want to do odd music. There's no question about it. That's, the people who resonate with that are people who resonate with weird stuff. But I tried to do, in addition to my more normal sort of odd stuff, I tried to do a few musical examples or examples that other people would consider musical. And I had a lot of fun doing that. And so then I decided, well, I should just make some modules for this. And,
off you were.
And off I went.
Now it's interesting. So for people out there who are curious about this stuff, one of the things I love, you had a site long ago. It was xfade.com, literally XFADE. And we're going to talk about these website naming things in a minute, but it actually has a bunch of both pictures and sound examples of your work from the time, which I think will be interesting because they still actually really hold up nicely. Because for myself, this was one of the cases where I was just like really happy to hear what you did, because instead of it sounding like Buchla in default mode, what it sounded like was someone's voice coming out of a Buchla. And I think people weren't sure how that happened, and I think that you kind of pointed them to a way that says, here's what it can sound like, at least,
Yeah, and I think people don't realize that it's a general purpose box.
Right.
People think it's only good for this specific, the Krell patch is the Krell patch is a great example where, you're modulating the frequency of random events and it's doing this little blippy thing. And that's great. Don't get me wrong. I've done hours of that.
As have we all.
Yes. But the key is that you can do all sorts of stuff with it. And once you meet it halfway, it's a great user interface for making a lot of racket pretty quick. And most of the stuff I did was real-time improv, which is sort of, what I like to do in general. And the Buchla allows you to be in control of a large palette of sounds in a fairly atomic way. I was generally not using any of the Buchla sequencers with it. I was using this max patch I came up with called Gyre, which is a fairly giant max patch, actually, which doesn't run in either Max 7 or Max 8.
Oh, no.
So, there'll be a lot of work to move that forward if I do decide to move that forward. So, yeah, the whole Buchla thing was great. And I guess I got one of the earlier 200E examples, and I was already sort of active on a couple of these sites. And so I found myself put in the position of defending it. It's not good for tonal music. Well, it can be good for tonal music. Look, here's an example. The timing is terrible on her, whatever the meme du jour was.
Right.
And so I did a bunch of examples that tried to show different aspects of what you could do with the device. And, luckily there are people who came along after me who picked up this baton.
Right.
Todd Barton's a great example. There are a handful of other great examples of people who had taken this. Take up the reins of this. And it's an interesting, Don, was a fascinating individual. I knew him for a really long time. I worked for him briefly a couple of times, and then I realized, I'm much better off having him as a friend than as an employer.
Right.
And, I knew him right up to the end, and fascinating individual for sure.
Indeed.
People think he's like they think he's like mean and fierce and prickly, and there were some aspects of that, but he was actually really funny in a weird sort of low-key way.
Yeah.
And it took people, hanging out with him a little bit before they realized that, he didn't eat children for breakfast.
Well, but also that he had, what you might take as sort of like a mean or angry response is just him being kind of like cynically humorous, right? He had that cynical humor thing.
Cynically humorous, and he wasn't one for small talk, and he really wasn't one for self-promotion or hero worship at all. At one of his last performances, the last time I saw him perform live was with his wife Danique at the SF Jazz place, and there was a panel discussion afterwards. Mm-hmm. And so there were a bunch of people. Someone asked Don a question that went on for 45 seconds, setting up this question. And I could tell right at the beginning of this question, I know how he's going to answer it. So it's this long, elaborate question. And then Don pauses for a beat, leans into the microphone and says, "No."
Right.
And that was Don. And people who knew him in the audience sort of went, tee-hee, tee-hee. And everybody else was going, what's wrong with this guy? Why? So yeah, Don, the mystery of Don.
Well, you've had a chance to really get to know some amazing people. In addition to Don, you brought up the name of David Wessel, who, if there's like a through thread of people that were amazingly influential to the West Coast, sort of like music maker and music developer community, it's him. He helped so many people, but also helped promote so many people and helped push the technology. He seems like an amazing guy. I got to meet him a few times, but I never really got to know him at all. And I feel like that's one of those two sad things of my life.
It is. I wish everyone could have gotten to know David because he was a man of enthusiasms.
Yes.
When he liked something, he really liked something. And he tried to get other people to see the beauty in it that he saw. Max was a great example. Early on, he was at Earcom when Max was developed. His enthusiasm for things was contagious. Mm. A lot of students, I'm sure, use Max to this day because of him. Because his love of it was there, and his love of strange surfaces, sort of influenced Don on Thunder, and he
definitely
went on.
Keith McMillan.
Definitely Keith McMillan. We were all hanging in Berkeley at about the same time, and we all managed to resonate with similar goals there.
Yeah. So it's interesting though that he was so influential, and I would say he was even sort of like the fountain from which a lot of instruments and software and stuff flowed, but he never chose to do anything like that himself that I know of.
Actually, he did. Sinmat has this thing called Slabs, which was a project of his, which was sensing surfaces at audio rates as opposed to a slower control rate.
Okay. All right.
So it was sampled ungodly fast, and the audio signal flowed over into the computer where there were drivers and Max things that dealt with this control surface at audio rate. which is great from a subtle gesture and sort of intimacy point of view.
Right.
Little sliding on pads were picked up, whereas if you're trying to turn that into events, it didn't quite work as well. So, he could control VCAs, the moral equivalent of VCAs in Macs from this pad and not have it feel like you were controlling it over MIDI,
Right.
because you were controlling it directly with audio. And so he did a bunch of stuff like that. There's a recording that he and Henry Kaiser and I did that's called At Sinmat, and he's playing the slabs there. I'm playing the buchla, Henry's playing guitar. And he does some remarkable work there. And he's had a few pieces over the years that he's done, and he's done quite a few performances with various people. But you're right in that he was more influential than his personal output might imply.
Right. Right. Well, I think that was the result of his enthusiasm. I mean, one of the things I can say is the times I did meet him, often it was like at, when AES had the show in San Francisco at the Moscone Center. I'd like always run into him there, and he always would have like some new technology that was, he'd do that thing where he was almost like hopping in place. He was so excited, right? I always looked forward to him coming because if nothing else, I knew that like no matter what kind of science fiction project I would have in my head, he'd show up with something that was like bizarrely further than that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think he because he was tapped into the research of institutions around the world, but particularly UC Berkeley, where Sinmat was based, he knew about a lot of stuff about processing that still hasn't quite seen the light of day. He was involved in doing projects with very large instruction words and a few other experimental techniques that the computing department at UC Berkeley was coming up with, but still hadn't quite seen the light of day. And at Earcom, basically he was I would say that certainly Miller Puckett wrote it, and there was some desire there in general. But if David Wessel hadn't been at Earcom, there would be no Max or MSP. He was the protector of Max there, because when Miller started Max there, MIDI was seen as a common technology. We're Earcom. We don't deal with common technologies. And so it took some protecting at Earcom to let Max flower there.
Yeah, unfortunately. So really interesting. Let's get back a little bit more to your work. First of all, you said that you're kind of getting back into guitar playing, and the guitar kind of like weaves throughout this whole story, right? What kind of, are you still doing Eardrill music, or have you find a way to like new age out the whole thing?
Well, I'm doing a lot of stuff with looping and writing strange little loopers for the Eventide world, some for the Max world, but I like to be able to take a rack someplace and play and not have to deal with a computer. So I've got a bunch of stuff on SoundCloud. SoundCloud.com/CBM will get you there.
Okay.
It's not what a lot of people would call music. Some of it is, fairly pleasant. Some of it is annoying. I've got a long-term project going with a few friends from Santa Cruz called the Lunar Asylum, and we do a bunch of annoying racket.
It seems like Santa Cruz is like the center of wacky looper people.
Rick Walker and his brother Bill are both there, and they do the Loop Fest, which actually the Lunar Asylum is playing the Loop Fest this year.
Oh, nice.
Sometime in October. I don't know the exact date. And the whole deal with my music is that it's sort of my centering practice more than anything else.
Yeah.
I don't do it to make a product usually. There have been some product stuff that has come out, but I rely on some of my co-conspirators to be the driving force behind that, because I tend to do it and then want to move on.
Well, that's actually a really interesting way to put it, because I've often wondered, like, for me, I have never had this burning desire to release, to do releases, right? But I can't wait for the next opportunity to perform. And why is that? It's what you just said really resonates with me. This thing where it's like making this stuff. First of all, it always feels like it's an expression of how I feel now. I'm not going to feel that way the next time I do this damn thing. So it may not resonate then, but it seemed to resonate at the moment, you know?
Right. And so what I've been trying to do both with my buchla work and with the recent guitar work is come up with systems that allow me to create a large, more or less organized racket
Right.
in real time.
Right.
And, don't want to go back and, okay, there's a clam in this particular guitar piece I'm playing. That's what lives there.
Right.
That clam lives there.
Yeah. Put the razor blade down. We're not going to be editing today.
Right. And, I take an adage from Miles to heart, which is there's no wrong note. There's only a wrong next note. And the beauty of that is it's absolutely true. If you play a wrong note and then figure out a way to make that work, it's a beautiful thing.
Right. A lot of times better than anything that would be fitting within the fence post, right?
Yeah, I mean, my take on Berkeley trained musicians is that they're largely great, but they've had all their mistakes, slapped out of them.
Right.
So they have to rely on their imagination, which isn't often enough. So because they're not making mistakes, they don't have to recover from those mistakes.
Right.
And I think they're poorer for it largely.
Right. Well, hey man, I love spending time with you. It's always great.
It is good. I've missed it.
Yeah, me too. So our time already got burned up, but before I let you go, I have to ask something. I've always been curious. I've never asked you about this before. I'm curious about the answer. Okay, so first of all, your email is a thing at well.com, like the first, one of the first widely used talk places on the internet. You hold such web domains as Eardrill and Xfade. CBM is, you would have been, how early did you have to be to get a TLA, a three-letter acronym on SoundCloud? You seem to be on the front end of every damn thing. Do you just like shotgun stuff and whenever a new thing comes up, grab it? Or how does that work?
I guess I inherited from David Wessel enthusiasms.
Yeah.
So basically the whole Xfade and Eardrill thing came up early on in the days of the web. I think this was I bet this was Beatnik, but it could have been a little earlier, where what's still available.
Right.
And Xfade and Eardrill were both available. Unfortunately, cave painting was gone. And fuzz tone was gone. A lot of, basic. So I think I did both Xfade and Eardrill one afternoon thinking, what's still around that's short?
Yeah, right.
And there's some DJ magazine which really, really wanted Xfade and was going to give me a couple of K for it. But, I figured, I've got it. Why not sit with it?
That's fun. Chris, this was such a fun time, as always. It was great. Thanks a lot for taking time out of your schedule. Get back out there and start drilling some ears with the guitar, and we're going to talk again soon, all right?
Sounds great. Good to talk to you as always.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks to Chris Muir for spending the time to have a chat. As always, we had a great time. You kind of got to listen into a couple of yucks talk it out. Really interesting stories, though, and kind of amazing background. Thanks to you, the listeners, for keeping on showing up every week. This is continues to be fun for me. I hope it's fun for you. If you have any questions, comments, if you know some people you'd like to have me interview and can make an introduction, please drop me a line, ddg@cycling74 or darwin.gross@gmail.com will work. ddg@20objects.com will work. I got all kinds of email addresses. But reach out, drop me a line, and help me get some stuff revved up here. I've got a busy summer coming along, but if you can help me get some stuff lined up, that'd be a lot of great help. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.